I really like history and biography, and so I like to know the stories of famous people or sometimes infamous people, or it's just interesting to hear these stories. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story of John Wesley, but John Wesley was an Englishman. His parents were highly involved in ministry. His dad was an Anglican priest, Samuel. His mother had a huge impact on John and his younger brother, Charles. Susanna was a very godly woman and someone that really shaped John and Charles in the direction of ministry. When John went to school at Oxford, he was in training himself to be an Anglican priest, and he was reading some literature in England at the time that talked about how that the noble savage, the Native American, had not heard the gospel. And so he thought, hey, I ought to be the guy that goes over and tells them that story. So at that time, and whenever I fly across the Atlantic, I always think of Wesley, because sometimes I might complain about having the middle seat, but hey, it wasn't 10 weeks on a boat, a little bitty boat. So that was what his experience was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. As he's going to Georgia for the very first time, there came a great storm. And he thought that he would die. The storm didn't just come and blow over, it stayed. It broke the mast on the ship, and he thought that he would die. And while he was in that state of agitation, he heard some people at the bottom of the ship that were singing and praying, and they're very quiet, very calm. He had a very anxious presence, fearing death, and he went down to the ship. And while he was down at the bottom of the ship, he asked the people, he said, "Don't you know we're about to die?" And he said, their response shook me even more than the storm. They said, whether we live or whether we die, we are with the Lord. So here's what happens next, is that the storm abates, the ship miraculously arrives in Georgia, and Wesley gets out of the boat and he's alive. But he who is going to convert the American Indian feels like he's not been converted himself. And so if you're a preacher and you don't have a message, you're in trouble. It didn't go well for John Wesley when he was in Georgia. Eventually he makes his way back to England, and he looks for those people, they're called Moravians, that were on that ship. And he looks for them and he wants to talk to them, and he wants to find faith. Because John Wesley thought that he was going to get to heaven by being a good person, by working at it, by being moral, by being a preacher. He thought all of those things would help him get access to heaven. And then he faces death, and so he kept a journal all of his life, and he said, I have a fair summer religion. As long as things are going well, he says, I believe, but let me face adversity, let me face death. He said, I really don't know what I believe. And so he made his way to a chapel on Aldersgate Street in London, and it was there that he gave his life to Christ. And it was while somebody was reading a preface to the book of Romans by Martin Luther, it was there that John Wesley said, I felt my heart strangely warmed. I felt I did trust in Christ alone for salvation, and an assurance was given me that He had saved me from the law of sin and death. So obviously, John Wesley has this big conversion experience. His life's transformed. I had one of those as well. My life totally changed. Reading in the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul, he has one of those big momentous occasions and his life changes. So obviously, everybody has to have a dramatic conversion experience or they're not a Christian, right? That was my assumption. And I carried that assumption with me all the way through ORU until my senior year, and I met my wife-to-be, Dana. So I said, okay, when was your time, when you felt your heart strangely warmed? And she said, that's never happened. I've never had that. To which I said, then you're not a Christian. It didn't go over well. We were dating. It's a wonder that we ever got married. But the thing is, I've come to discover as a pastor that more people, I think, it's like 2 to 1, are like Dana than are like me. And so a lot of people really feel intimidated because they can't say, well, it was on this date, at this place, that such and such happened. But it's been more of a process than a single event. And even my single event wasn't just one time. It's something that's lasted my whole life. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the weeks to come, is these other things that Wesley said, other words of Wesley. Question I'd like to ask you to share around your table right now is that you've got a story. And maybe your story is like, well, yeah, I'm like Wesley before he got on the boat. You don't know where you are. And that's okay. Share that, because there'll be somebody else feeling just like you or very similar to that. You may have a dramatic experience. You may be like Dana. Whatever it is, we just like to put this up, because we're here to help others follow Jesus. That's why we're here, helping others follow Jesus. We want to do that. We want to be able to share this message, and we want you to follow Him as well, because like I said, He's the key to life, here now and eternally. So share this with the folks around your table, if you would. How it is that you relate to this story about coming to faith in Christ.